Global governance analyst Thembisa Fakude joins us now for more on Ramaphosa's speech. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. You could say four things would have been highlighted, but a large part of it focusing really on the Middle East war. He touched on the reforms of the UN Security Council. He touched on climate change action and climate financing and capacity building, but also touched on some debt relief. But to come in, he starts with this GNU thing to say, hey, look, our democracy is maturing, our political culture is maturing, we are doing well. And he says, pretty much a testament also to the intervention of the UN. And almost to say, you know, you did good here in South Africa, why are you not doing the same over there in the Middle East?
Yeah, I think it was a well-structured, well-measured speech. And I'm glad that he did give the background of why South Africa went to the ICJ, because many people didn't understand the historical background of apartheid, what we went through, and why we should allow or sit and watch similar oppression happening elsewhere was very important to give that background. And I think he did well in that regard. And he went on, of course, to talk about other things, including the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which was very important. But the GNU part, as you correctly put it, is very important because that gives some sort of confidence to the world that South Africa's democracy is matured. South Africa continues to improve on its democracy, and I think that was very, very important particularly for the direct foreign investment, which is what President Cyril Ramaphosa, Reinhard Lamola, and Park Stow have been in New York trying to promote. They were there mainly to do business. And we've seen that both Minister Lamola and Park Stow were there before President Cyril Ramaphosa. Last night, they met at the New York Stock Exchange, and we know that what happened today with Elon Musk. So there's a dovetailing of a foreign policy with trade, and I think that's what he's going to try and promote henceforth. It's not going to be philosophy, ideology, and politics, but it's also going to be trade because of the dire situation we find ourselves in this country.
Yeah. How important is it for him to highlight to world leaders there at the 79th session that, look, we are doing our fair share towards dealing with the global effects of climate change. We are doing our share in terms of putting in place a just transition plan. We are also involved in mediation and conflict resolution amongst ourselves across the African continent. So we are doing our bit. You guys need to come on board and also do likewise.
Yeah, well, South Africa is going to be the largest benefactor of or beneficiary of the new green economy. We've already signed into big deals, and we're the first one to commit into transitioning. And the Western world, who has given us all of those monies, are expecting us to move swift in terms of transformation, moving away from fossil fuels into green energy. But importantly, South Africa is going to be the key driver of transformation in Africa and within the African Union. So he had to say what he said because he had to kind of give confidence and some sort of guarantee to all those people that are investing in South Africa and those that have already invested and those that have given us loans to go into this transition, that we are committed and plans are afoot in ensuring that we move as expected.
Almost to remind them also to say, look, you developed countries, we made some commitments to climate action. We are doing our bit, but it seems you guys are not coming on board and you are deepening, if you like, the global inequality.
Well, indeed, some of these countries, including Germany, are moving back to coal, notwithstanding that we're showing an extraordinary enthusiasm in terms of our transformation, notwithstanding, of course, that our economies are not ready for this transformation. But our government has moved on and steam ahead in terms of committing itself to transforming our economy, energy, resources, and needs. So I think it was a reminder to them that, notwithstanding that this is not our fault and we are not a large contributor to the current situation, environmental degradation that we find ourselves, we are doing more than you guys are doing. And I think it was it was a reminder that the world needs to do more, particularly the developing world, who have developed economically over the years and decades, using using the fuels that they have been using, which have contributed towards the environmental degradation that we find ourselves. And yet, the African countries that did not do much and are still in the process of developing are already forced, expected to transition to cleaner energies. It's a bit unfair, and I think that was what he was trying to drive home.
Yeah. The call for reforms of these multilaterals is not new, be it the UN Security Council, be it the ICC, and so on and so forth. But felt the need once again to reiterate that, look, you are talking about us, but we are not at the table.
Yeah, and even in 1945, 47, when the United Nations proper was established, most African countries were still under the colonial rule, and many African countries did not participate in the establishment of the current policies that govern the United Nations General Assembly, the United Nations Security Council. So there is indeed a need for the revamp of the UN. But at the same time, I'm one of those who's quite wary about joining the United Nations Security Council, because this is the club of countries that decides who lives and who dies and who gets sanctioned, etc. Now, given the weaker borders that we have as South Africa, I'm not quite sure whether we're ready to be offending certain people. We know that people walk far and wide and enter this country without proper documentation, etc. Our borders are extremely weak. And here we are speaking as if we are ready to tackle the world. So it's a club, particularly the United Nations Security Council. It's a club or a body of really big boys that can really tackle the world, particularly the big guys, and there are a lot of big guys in the world who just want to create havoc. Now, South Africa, is it ready to do so if you can't even deal with our own borders?
Would say it's consistent with the South Africa's international relations policy and stance to hear President Cyril Ramaphosa emphasizing on the conflict in the Middle East. You had Joe Biden's speech emphasizing on the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. South Africa mentioning nothing about that. Yet you've got South Africa, not so long ago, as you mentioned, in Washington and New York and other places wanting to collaborate with the United States.
Yeah, it's our foreign policy, but it's also our habit of biting more than we can chew. And particularly when it comes to, I think the United Nations definitely need to be revamped, as I put it earlier on, that we're not there when some of these governing issues were agreed upon, particularly on issues of the P5, which is the permanent 5 members that sit and have veto powers within the United Nations Security Council. Now, what South Africa and others are pushing for, including Turkey and other countries who've heard what President Erdogan said, is to revamp that part of the United Nations. But again, it's just too late for me in a day. United Nations is a toothless, or is rapidly becoming a toothless body with a lot of competing platforms, whether it's NATO, BRICS, FORCAC, and others. I mean, China in itself is trying to chart a new way forward in terms of how it sees the world and how it can save the world in partnership with countries in Africa, for example. So there are a lot of bilaterals and other multilateral bodies that are looking at dictating the new trajectory in terms of global politics, diplomacy, and economics. And I think at this point, we will be really left with a responsibility that's going to be too heavy for us to carry if we really still insist on being part of the United Nations Security Council, notwithstanding its less importance. I don't think we should really be pushing that hard, notwithstanding, of course, what I've said earlier in terms of deciding who lives and who dies, but it's just not a body that's worth dying for at the moment. I think we rather look at other platforms, particularly platforms such as BRICS, G20, G20 and others, to ensure that we participate and strengthen those platforms. SADC, AU, there are a lot of other platforms that I think need strengthening than us spending time trying to resuscitate a dying horse.
When it comes to debt, seemingly to say, look, the debt repayment structures or models that are currently being used are not conducive for the development of, for example, the African continent and other developing countries. When he says, let us reform the global financial architecture, what is he actually telling them?
Well, it's basically saying that the current restrictions and conditions that are put for Africa to access debt in order for them to finance their own domestic economies needs a revamp. What we see China doing at the moment, and I think that was a message directly coming from Falkirk and the state visit that South Africa had a couple of days ago in Beijing, basically saying that we have a new partner in the form of China that's willing to work with us regarding debt financing, etc. And what has been happening, unfortunately, is that I think Cyril Ramaphosa is also wary of having a sole source of debt financing and loans, which is China. He would like to have the facilities spread throughout the world, as it's been the case. But for that to happen, the playing field needs rectification. The lending platforms need to realize that China is doing a fair business in inverted commas in Africa, and they need to adjust to those realities, because currently the type of conditions and structural adjustment programs that are often imposed on African countries when it comes to loans, whether it's for the World Bank, IMF, and others, have been very stringent and have not been helpful to the African economies. Prioritizing things that are not of necessity within the African economies has been one major criticism from the African countries when it comes to dealing with the Western and European lenders.
What tone does this set? I mean, as far as, of course, relations, interaction going forward between countries within the global north, global south, but particularly when it comes to South Africa, Israel, and the United States? I mean, we know, for example, the fact that we went to the ICJ certainly rubbed America the wrong way. They even threatened to take AGOA away. I don't know whether they still have an appetite for that. But this particular presentation by the president, does it go to irritate them even more? Does it change anything, really?
Well, I don't think so. I think President Cyril Ramaphosa was just trying to emphasize that South Africa is not going to change its position on the ICJ. It's going to go ahead with the case, and it did say that it was glad that other countries have since joined in. Of course, it's easy for those countries. South Africa took, one would say, a bullet, and now they can easily join because it's easier now to criticize the Israeli government and Benjamin Netanyahu. So I think the relationship is quite clear. And again, it was important for him to explain why South Africa took the position it took, because South Africa is signatory to a number of multilaterals that discourage genocide. One. Number two is we have a history in this country, which is very fresh, of oppression and apartheid. And South Africa couldn't just sit and see what's happening in Israel without commenting or acting on it. And that explanation, I think it was very important. So I think moving forward is going to be a constructive relationship. We know that Minister Pakstow was, this is a second trip that is undertaken. Last week he was in the United States before the arrival of President Cyril Ramaphosa, having a discussion about AGOA, having a discussion about trade between South Africa and the United States. So those discussions are afoot and constructive, and I think they are likely to yield a result. We saw President Cyril Ramaphosa being hosted yesterday by the New York Stock Exchange. We saw Elon Musk also all smiles, shaking hands with Ronald Lamola, Pakstow, and President Cyril Ramaphosa. So business-wise, I think we're on the right track. We are likely to continue improving our relations with the United States. Politically, I think the United States have, to an extent, learned to respect South Africa's position when it comes to its independent position on global politics and geopolitics.
Thembisa Fakude, I appreciate your time as always. Thanks so much for coming on, global governance expert there. Thembisa Fakude giving us his analysis of the presentation earlier on by President Cyril Ramaphosa at the 79th session of the United Nations. Right.